All right, good morning, everybody. Welcome to another incredible episode of Outlandish Talmud Stories and Outstanding Life Lessons. Today's class is called Victims, Villains, and False Humility. I hope you can download the source sheet. If you're on Facebook, you have the link there, or on YouTube. And we're going to get started. So often you'll find, if you're studying Talmud, a very common question the Talmud would ask is, why were the temples in Jerusalem destroyed? Why was Jerusalem destroyed? Why were the Jewish people murdered? Why were they exiled from their land? Why did the Jewish people lose sovereignty over the state of Israel? Now, when you hear that question, you say, well, that's not a very big question. Any amateur historian can answer that question. It's very simple. Jews throughout their history have had many, many enemies. Enemies who've wanted to destroy them, to eliminate them off the map, to drive them into the Mediterranean Sea. That's Jewish people, sadly. Nowadays, we see Jewish privilege, the hashtag trending. And that's part of Jewish privilege. We're very cognizant of our history. It's been a very rocky ride. We're doing our best. We're staying relevant. We're present. We're still here. We're teaching our Torah. We're offering our God, our values to society. But not always does everybody welcome that. And that's part of the package of Jewish privilege. So whether it's the Babylonians who destroyed the first temple, the Romans destroyed the second temple, every single enemy ever since up until today, that's a simple story. So it's a simple answer to the question. But when the Talmud asks the question, it's asking a much deeper one. We know there are enemies who try to destroy the Jewish people. The question is, if God is the guardian of Israel, as the King David says in Tehillim, Hine lo yanum v'lo yishan shomer Yisrael, the guardian of Israel does not sleep nor slumber, and God is in control of the universe. Why does God allow for the enemies to destroy the Jewish people, destroy the land of Israel, and to destroy our temple? Why were the Jews deserving of such a punishment, of such harsh treatment? That is the Talmud's question. And for that, the Talmud offers all kinds of explanations about what was going wrong in the Jewish community and the Jewish nation that made them deserving of this. It's similar to the concept that Maimonides describes, that whenever there's a calamity, a disaster, a tragedy happening on a personal level, on a communal level, on a national level, of course you have to deal with it, but one of the things you have to always do is take a step back and take some reflection. A stock take of your own life or your community life. What's going on in our life? Not that necessarily we're being punished this way, but what can we enhance? What can we improve that we could be a greater vessel to the blessings and salvation of God? So when it comes to the first temple, why was the first temple destroyed by the Babylonians? The Talmud seems it's a very clear answer. At that time, the Jews had stooped to a very low moral level. They were engaged in all kinds of sin, especially or including the three cardinal sins: murder, sexual immorality, idolatry. Hard to imagine, but the Jews were involved with these sins. So the Talmud says, of course, they were deserving of that kind of treatment from Hashem, from God, until they learn to mend their ways and they can come back and rebuild in Jerusalem. But when it comes to the second temple, the Talmud's a little confused, because at that time we have a record that the Jewish community was overall doing very well, outstanding in their performance of the mitzvot, of listening to God's instructions, of following the Torah, studying the Torah. So the question becomes, well, then why then were they deserving that the temple, Jerusalem, should be destroyed by the Romans? So that's going to be the topic of today's class. We are now in the 3 weeks between last week, the 17th of Tammuz, when the Romans breached and the walls of Jerusalem and broke into Jerusalem, and that led up to 3 weeks later on Tisha B'Av, the Romans and the Babylonians in the first temple actually destroy the temple, that infamous, tragic day. And so these 3 weeks are 3 weeks of mourning, 3 weeks of reflection, 3 weeks of all kinds of customs and traditions that put us in a frame of mind to be able to reflect and think about our past, our present, and plan for our future. So we're going to study one story that's in the Talmud in Gittin, page 55, 56, as you can see in your source sheet. Those few pages of the Talmud are filled with many, many stories that happened during the time or before the time of the destruction of the temple. And that's the most, even though the Talmud is not a historic book per se, but that is one of the most prominent sections of the Talmud that deal with the history of that era, the destruction of the temple. So today's story is on Talmud Gittin, page 55b, goes over to 56a, and you have the story in your source sheet. Let's learn this together. Rabbi Yochanan said, what is the meaning of the verse that is written in the book of Proverbs, in the book of Mishlei, chapter 28, verse 14? It says as follows: happy is the man who fears always, but he who hardens his heart shall fall into mischief. And he says, this is a teaching that Jerusalem was destroyed on account of Kamta and Bar Kamta. So this verse seems to be the indicator of why Jerusalem was destroyed, and it results from the story of Kamta and Bar Kamta. What is going to be the theme of this story? What do we learn from this verse? Happy is the man who fears always. What is the positive trait about always being in a state of fear? So some commentaries learn that the theme of this story is actually a theme of sinat chinam, which means baseless hatred. That is a very common topic that the Talmud refers to with regards to why the temple was destroyed, because the Jews had baseless hatred for each other. What does baseless hatred mean? In a way, all hatred is always baseless. You understand? There's never a reason to hate. Hate is a terrible, unhealthy, toxic emotion. Hate is not allowed in Torah law, in Jewish law. In secular law, nothing wrong with hate. You can't act upon your hatred. You can't commit a harmful, violent act against somebody else. But if you are a peaceful man in terms of your behavior, but inside your heart you hate somebody, nothing wrong with that, nothing immoral about that. No one's even going to know that you hate somebody. But in the Torah law, you're not allowed to hate someone even in your heart, even if no one else knows you hate them, but God knows you hate them, and that is not allowed. And hatred is a very toxic emotion. Hatred truly ruins you. Hatred, forget about what, it severs the kind of chance of relationship with someone else, but hatred wears you down. Hatred totally consumes your life, and it makes you into a very unhealthy person. You should never hate. And that's going to be the theme of this story. But there's another commentary that says, more closely relevant to the words of the verse, happy is the man who fears always. This is a lesson in the positive trait of fear. What is the positive trait of fear? To the contrary, fear is never a good thing. But don't we know that you should never be afraid? Fear can also be a very toxic emotion. So here, elsewhere in the Talmud, there's this distinction between different kinds of fear. And it goes with a story. I'm going to read the story out. The Talmud says a story. It's not our story for today, that there was once the student of Rabbi Yishmael who was walking behind him in the marketplace. And Rabbi Yishmael turned around and he saw the student was filled with fear. Maybe the marketplace was filled with Roman soldiers. He was very afraid. So he turns to his student and he says, you're a sinner. And he says, why am I a sinner? He said, because there's a verse in Isaiah that says that all those in Zion, in Jerusalem and Israel, who are afraid are transgressors. If you experience fear, you're a transgressor. So the student replies, but doesn't it say elsewhere in Mishlei, in Proverbs, which is the verse in our story that says, happy is the man who fears always? So Rabbi Yishmael, his teacher, taught him there's different kinds of fear. That verse, happy is the man who fears always, is written with regards to matters of Torah. Meaning as follows. If you're experiencing fear because you're afraid, because you think that maybe God doesn't control the world, maybe something's going to happen to me that shouldn't happen to me, and all those kinds of fears that we concoct in our minds, that is no good. That you're a sinner, you're a transgressor, you're unhealthy, you're going to live a very paralyzed life. But the fear that you should always experience, we should really translate that differently, is more one of vigilance and being concerned and being cautious and being careful. That is a healthy trait. That keeps you on the right path, and that makes sure that you're never veering off the wrong path, always making sure you're checking your ways. So that's the explanation in the verse. Now let's get into the story. What's the story of Kamsa and Bar Kamsa? That because of that, Jerusalem was destroyed. So the story goes like this. This is as there was a certain man whose friend was named Kamsa and whose enemy was named Bar Kamsa. Now, who is this man? We're not told his name. Apparently, he was a prominent person, a very wealthy person. Maybe we'll soon see why we're not being told his name. But he has one friend, Kamsa, and one enemy, Bar Kamsa. Who are Kamsa and Bar Kamsa? Beyond their names, what do we know about them? We don't really know much. Some say that Bar Kamta, Bar in Aramaic means like Ben in Hebrew, son of. Some say it was father and son. Father was Kamta, son was Bar Kamta, son of Kamta. Others say they were two complete different people. There's actually a reference in Josephus. Josephus, who we turn to for some of our history. Maybe it's not entirely reliable, but he does speak about a gentleman by the name of Compsos, son of Compsos, who lived in the city of Tiberias in Tveria. Was it the same person or not? Hard to tell. But we have these two people, Kamta and Bar Kamta. Kamta was a good friend of this host, and Bar Kamta was the enemy. Now, this person once made a large feast, a party. And he said to his servant, here's my guest list. Go and invite my friends. And he tells him, go bring me my friend Kamta. Kamta, my good friend's on the guest list. But the servant went and made a mistake. And he misread the guest list. Instead of inviting Kamta, he invites the enemy, Bar Kamta. Now, when Bar Kamta receives his invitation, he came, as we're going to see. Now, why did he come? He knows this is his enemy. He must have thought favorably about this person, judged him favorably. He may have thought, well, maybe he's trying to make peace with me. Maybe he wants to become friends again. And especially if this was the son of the father, if he's friends with my father, it's good that he should be friends with the family. So, and also, something very beautiful is that the Talmud teaches that when you have somebody who's done harm to you, and you're tempted to hate them or to reject them from your life, and then you learn to make peace with them, learn to connect once again and welcome somebody who's done harm to you, God says, then to somebody who's done a sin to me, I will make peace with you. I will forgive you. So Bar Kamta may have thought that he's trying to do teshuvah and change his ways. He's making peace with me, and then I know God's going to make peace with him. So Bar Kamta's not invited, but Bar Kamta makes it to the feast. By the way, as we're going to see the whole story, Kamta doesn't play any role in this story, which is why Kamta maybe is very upset that the Talmud says that Jerusalem was destroyed on the story of Kamta and Bar Kamta. Kamta didn't do anything over here. He has no role in this story. Anyhow, the man who was hosting the feast came and found Bar Kamta sitting at the feast. He walks in and he sees all his guests. He's very delighted, but then he sees Bar Kamta sitting at the table. Host said to Bar Kamta, that man is the enemy of that man. He spoke in third person. That is, you are my enemy. What then do you want here? Arise and leave. He wants to kick Bar Kamta out of the party. You're ruining the whole party. Bar Kamta said to him, listen, since I've already come, let me stay, and I will give you money for wherever I eat and drink. Me being here is not going to cost you a penny. I'm already here. I'll pay for my meal. Just don't embarrass me in public by sending me out. There are so many people here at the feast. Many prominent people, rabbis and community leaders also came to this feast. Please don't embarrass me. The host said to him, no, you must leave now. So Bar Kamta tried to negotiate. He said, I'll give you money for half of the feast. You can imagine this is a very expensive, lavish party. I'll pay for half the party. Just don't send me away. The host said, no, you must leave now. So Bar Kamta doesn't give up. He then said to him, I'll give you money for the entire feast. Just let me stay. Now, this host is probably a very wealthy person. I'm not sure if that money meant something to him, although paying for the entire feast, I'm sure it does. But maybe Bar Kamta really didn't have much money. He was just trying to save his skin. Please don't embarrass me. I'll pay for the whole party. The host said to him, no, you must leave. Bar Kamta didn't move. Finally, the host took Bar Kamta by his hand, picked him up by his collar, stood him up, and took him out. He threw him out of the party. Bar Kamta has been thrown out of the house. Now, publicly shamed. Shaming in public is a very bad thing. Shaming in general is a very bad thing. The Talmud teaches that it's better that somebody should jump into a cauldron of fire than, heaven forbid, shame someone else. Elsewhere, the Talmud says, better that someone should give away their life than shame somebody else. Shaming is a terrible thing. And here, Bar Kamta is pleading for his dignity, and yet the host has no care or interest for him, picks him up in front of everybody and throws him out. After having been cast out from the feast, Bar Kamta said to himself, since the sages were sitting there and did not protest the actions of the host, although they saw how he humiliated me, learn from it that they were content with what he did. He was very disappointed. He wasn't only disappointed with the host, but now we're learning he was disappointed with everybody else. What happened over here? The table was filled with community leaders and rabbis, and nobody said a word. Nobody came to protect my dignity, my honor. No one came to protest the ways of the host who publicly humiliated me. Why didn't they, by the way? That's a very sad thing to learn, that it's one thing if the host was a lousy guy, but all the community leaders and rabbis. So apparently we're told as follows. This is another very sad thing that went on during that era. A terrible disease that was plaguing the Jewish community and particularly Jewish leaders at the time was something that the Talmud refers to as chanifa. Chanifa is a word, in English we say flattery. Flattery, says the Talmud, is a very terrible thing. Yes, of course, it's important to praise people. It's important to judge people favorably. But flattery is when you offer undeserving, unwarranted praise about someone else. And you do it because you have an agenda. It's obviously insincere and dishonest. But maybe you need something from them. Maybe you need money. Maybe you need donations. Maybe you need connections. Maybe you need their pull, their position, you need their alliance, whatever it is. And you're willing to be dishonest and flatter them in a way that's completely dishonest and undeserving. Says the Talmud, that's a terrible trait. The community leaders and rabbis at the time suffered from this plague of chanifa. So much so that there's a story that the Talmud says that at some point in that time, there was a king who emerged. His name was Agrippas. Agrippas became king even though he was somewhat legally illegitimate to become king because of some illegitimacy in his ancestry. He wasn't supposed to be a Jewish king, but because of his wealth and his power, became a king. And the story goes that one Sukkot during the year of Hakel, when all Jewish people gathered to the temple and listened to the king read passages from Torah, Agrippas was reading from the Torah and he read a passage that speaks about how the mitzvah is to appoint upon yourself a king that's deserving of being king, that is rightfully suitable to be a king. And as he's reading those words, Agrippa starts to cry because he knows that he has hijacked this job undeservingly. He's breaking down and crying, and all the people, all the Jewish people standing there, and even the leaders and the rabbis, they scream out to him and they say, "No, my dear brother, you are our brother. Please don't cry. We love you. We respect you. You're deserving." That was a big mistake. Rabbi Natan taught at that moment the enemies of the Jewish people, that's a euphemism, it means the Jewish people, were sentenced to destruction for flattering Agrippas. Often the Talmud doesn't want to say the Jews are worthy of destruction, so it uses a euphemism. It says the enemies of the Jews, but it means the Jews. And because of what they did, that's another reason why they're deserving of destruction. This false flattery. In fact, Rabbi Shimon the son of Chalapta taught, from the day that the power of flattery prevailed, the judgment has become corrupted. People's deeds have become corrupted. And the person can't say to another, "My deeds are greater than your deeds," as everybody flatters one another and people no longer know the truth. If you enter into a state of flattery and false praise and people are falsely protecting and sucking up to each other, you have a big problem on your hands, a very unhealthy environment in the community. So now we have a situation where none of the rabbis have protested that the host has thrown Bar Kamta out of the party. So Bar Kamta is so disappointed and publicly shamed. He says, "I will therefore go and inform against them to the king, to the Roman emperor. I'm going to show them." So what does he do? He went and he says to the Roman emperor, "The Jews are rebelling against you." The emperor said to him, "How do you know? Who said this is the case? I haven't heard any such commotion, any such rumors." Bar Kamta said to him, "Here, I'll give you a proof. Go and test them. Send them an offering, an animal, to be brought as a sacrifice in honor of you, in honor of the government. And let's see whether they're going to sacrifice it or not." The emperor said, "That's fine, that's a good test." So he prepares a egla tilsa. He sends him with a choice 3-year-old calf. In the Talmud, the expression is egla tilsa. Tilsa might mean that the calf is a 3-year-old calf, which is a a stage of maturity of the calf. It's a beautiful animal worthy of a sacrifice. Tilsa may also mean it's a third-born calf. Apparently, offspring. The third-born offspring is supposed to be extra healthy, precious, and choicest. Maybe because the womb has become matured and now the animal is a beautiful animal. Or with a human also. If you're a third-born in your child, you should know that there's something special about you. But you have to live up to it. Or it just means that he sent him with a very choicey quality calf. So he sends this calf with Bar Kamta to take it to Jerusalem for a sacrifice. Now, while Bar Kamta was coming with the calf to the temple, here becomes the troublemaker. He made a blemish on the calf's upper lip. And some say he made the blemish on its eyelids. A blemish in a place where, according to us, in other words, Jewish law, halacha, it's a blemish, but according to them, according to the Romans and their laws, Gentile rulings for their offerings, it is not a blemish. So Bar Kamsa makes a blemish. The emperor doesn't know about this. So when they come to the temple, it's a blemish that the Roman emperor would say it's not really a sufficient blemish that it can't be a sacrifice. But according to halacha, an animal has to be perfect, complete, looking good without blemish to be a sacrifice. If it has any kind of blemish, it can't be a sacrifice. And he blemishes it either on the lip or on the eyelid. Two different opinions. Why these locations? So here you have also beautiful symbolism over here. The lips represent the mouth, which represents the power of speech. The power of speech is a tool. We have to use it wisely. We use our words cleverly and honestly to compliment others, to thank others, to express gratitude, to build relationships. That's what the power of speech should be used for. If it's used for anything else, destructive words, negative words, words of lashon hara, words of defamation, then, which is a sin that the Jewish people were experiencing at that time, that's a terrible abuse of the power of speech. It causes destruction. That's one symbolism, the blemish in the lip. Another symbolism, the blemish in the eye, is the power of how we see things literally and view things, perspective. You have to see another and judge someone else favorably. See things in their context. Try to look deep. Try to understand what's really going on and bring a positive, beneficial outcome. But if you abuse your power of vision and you want to look negatively and you want to see the bad and you want to see what's wrong with somebody else, and you can always find that. And that's an abuse in the power of the eyes as well. So here the blemish indicates two sins that were going on, the abuse of speech and the abuse of the power of vision. Okay, so now, therefore, when Bar Kamsa brought the animal to the temple, and they inspected the animal and it had blemishes, the priest would not sacrifice it on the altar since it was blemished. But they also could not explain this satisfactorily to the Gentile authorities who did not consider a blemish. They're in a bind. They're not sure what to do. They know this is a gift from the Roman emperor and possibly a test. And they have to keep good relations with the Roman emperor. But what should they do? The animal is blemished, according to them, but not according to Roman law. So what should they do? The blemish notwithstanding, the sages thought to sacrifice the animal as an offering due to the imperative to maintain peace with the government. They said, let's sacrifice it anyhow. It's against the law. So there's something called shlom malchut. You have to keep peace with your government. It's protecting your own life. It's protecting the community. And for the sake of doing things that protect the Jewish community, you can sometimes override the law. Which leads into another concept called hora'at sha'ah. Hora'at sha'ah means as follows. The law is the law. You have to always keep to the law. But occasionally, in times of great need, when there's a great emergency and something needs to be saved, you can suspend the regular law and apply a temporary law just for that moment to save the situation. Now, you have to be very careful with this. It's a very interesting, beautiful Jewish halachic concept, but of course, you can't abuse this concept. So they wanted to apply hora'at sha'ah, suspend the regular ruling, and offer this animal as a sacrifice to maintain peace with the Roman emperor. They came to the head of the Sanhedrin, the head of the court, the head rabbi, the head priest. His name was Rabbi Zechariah, the son of Avkulas. But he said to them, if the priests do that, people will say that blemished animals may be sacrificed offerings on the altar. Rabbi Zechariah said, I don't want to go ahead with the sacrifice. Why? Because somebody out there will hear that we offered a blemished animal on the altar. They're not going to know the whole back end to the story. And they're going to say, oh, look what the priests are doing nowadays. They're started to offer blemished animals on the altar, which means they're violating Torah law. They don't care about God anymore. They don't care about the Torah. So no wanting to give off that impression, something called marit ayin. Marit ayin is you have to be careful about how people perceive what you're doing. Zechariah ruled, we're not offering this as a sacrifice. So the sages said, if we don't sacrifice the animal, then we must prevent Bar Kamsa from reporting this to the emperor. At least let's not let Bar Kamsa leave here alive. Let's deal with him. We have to do something about him because he's going to cause us trouble if we're not going to offer the sacrifice. Let's kill him. And they were allowed to, by the way, because there's a Jewish law that says that if somebody has the status of a rodef means a pursuer. If someone is pursuing to kill another person, then you're allowed to. In fact, it's a mitzvah to kill that person and prevent him from killing someone else. He's a potential murderer. He's a murderer in the act. Bar Kamsa was going to go straight back to the Roman emperor, inform that the Jews are rebelling, and there's going to be destruction to not just one person, but the whole community. There seems to be legal grounds, sufficient legal grounds, to kill Bar Kamsa. Yet, again, Rabbi Zechariah stood up and he said, if you kill him, people will say the one that makes a blemish on sacrificial animals is to be killed. Again, people will hear about he was killed. They'll know one part of the story, that he brought a blemished animal to the temple, but they don't know the whole back end of the story. They don't know that he's coming from the Roman emperor and they don't know the context. And people will start to say, Bar Kamsa was killed because of what sin? Because he brought a blemished animal to the temple? They could have refused the animal. Don't offer it as a sacrifice. But the Torah doesn't say that is worthy of capital punishment. Why are you killing Bar Kamsa? So Zechariah was very afraid of the impression that it's going to make. As a result, they did nothing. Bar Kamsa's slander was accepted by the authorities. He came back to the emperor and said, what happened? They're not offering your sacrifice. And consequently, the war between the Jews and the Romans began. Here you have the cause for the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple, and that's because of the story here with Bar Kamsa. How interesting that the story contains, the subject of the story is this kaf. The kaf in Hebrew is the egel. We Jewish people are very sensitive to certain things. When you mention the word egel, right away our hair starts to stand up on our spine. Why? Because what does the egel remind you of? We have in history the famous, infamous egel hazahav, the golden calf. When the Jewish people miscalculated, when Moses is coming down Mount Sinai, they're standing at the foot of Mount Sinai. They just received the Torah 40 days earlier, but Moses is not coming down. So they decide to build a new god for themselves. They build the Egel Hazav. They worship it. This Egel becomes the cause of great destruction then and forever in Jewish life. It caused the destruction of the Torah because Moses came down the next day and broke the 10 Commandments, broke the 2 tablets. This Egel becomes this barrier between the Jewish people and God. It serves as this obstruction. They lose their clarity in faith in God. And it's representative of all times when Jews will lose that kind of clarity. And we are taught that the Egel Hazav, the golden calf, is the source for all exiles and the source for all trouble and sorrow and tragedy throughout Jewish history. Well, here once again we have a story of destruction of Jerusalem happening through an Egel, through a calf. So the symbolism there is very, very strong. So now we know why Jerusalem was destroyed, because of the story of Kamsa and Bar Kamsa, as Rabbi Yochanan taught us. And if you go back to the original verse, happy is the man who fears always. Well, something went wrong over here with somebody fearing always. Was there an element of sinat chinam? Was there an element of baseless hatred because of who? Because of maybe the host. He couldn't tolerate the Bar Kamsa sitting at his party. Maybe it's because of the rabbis sitting there and they didn't speak up. Maybe it's because of Zechariah. He didn't foresee the consequence of his decisions. It's a bit ambiguous over here how the story relates to the verse, but because of this story, it says Rabbi Yochanan, Jerusalem was destroyed. However, the story doesn't stop there. Rabbi Yochanan adds one final teaching. Rabbi Yochanan says The excessive humility of Rabbi Zechariah, son of Kulas, destroyed our temple, burned our sanctuary, and exiled us from our land. Rabbi Yochanan is almost conflicting what he said earlier. Earlier he said, you know why the temple was destroyed? Because of Bar Kamta. And Bar Kamta is saying, you know, I did what I did because of the rabbis and because of the host. Now Yochanan comes to add and he says, actually, Zechariah is the one that's at fault. He caused the destruction. And what was his problem? What was he guilty of? Excessive humility. Wow. Never heard of somebody being blamed and faulted for excessive humility. I wish people had some more excessive humility. Apparently it seems that it's true that Kamta and Bar Kamta, that story, led to the destruction of the temple. However, if Zechariah would have acted differently, it could have been prevented. And so at the end of the day, in the larger context, we're faulting the leader. Because whenever you have an issue in the community, you have disruptors, you have troublemakers, and they're trying to cause havoc in the community. Of course, we're not justifying them. We're not judging them unfavorably. They are to be punished. They are guilty. They're causing a lot of pain and harm. However, when leadership is doing its job, it should be able to stop it, prevent it. It should be able to make it go away and protect the community. And when leadership fails in doing what it should do, then at the end of the day, where does the buck stop? Where's the fault lie? In the leadership. And here Rabbi Yochanan says Zechariah ben Avkilas was at fault for not stopping this. Whether it's offering the sacrifice or killing Bar Kamsa, all of his decisions were wrong, and therefore he led to the destruction of the temple, which is a very harsh thing to say. And let's understand what Rabbi Yochanan is saying. What was his crime? What was his sin? Excessive humility. What's wrong with humility? What's wrong with excessive humility? And what was Zechariah's excessive humility? I mean, if he made poor decisions, that's one thing, but why are you calling it excessive humility? I want to share with you 6 explanations, briefly, about Zechariah's excessive humility, what went wrong, and what we can learn from all this. Rashi, the famous commentary, says, don't read anava, don't read humility, but it really refers to savlanut, which means like too much tolerance and patience. It's Zechariah's excessive tolerance and patience that caused the destruction of Jerusalem. Tolerance and patience of what? Of who? Of Bar Kamsa. Bar Kamsa should have been dealt with very harshly. He was trying to set the Jewish people up. Let's talk about Bar Kamsa for a moment, by the way. When we first read the story, and we heard that Bar Kamsa was pleading for him to stay at the party, he's going to offer to pay for the whole party, and yet he's publicly humiliated, picked up, and thrown out of the party, we all had a lot of pity for Bar Kamsa. Poor guy. What did he do wrong? He was an enemy? Well, the host is also guilty. It takes 2 to tango whenever there's a fight going on. We had a lot of pity for him. But the next thing Bar Kamsa does is, yeah, you're going to mess with me like that? Well, watch how I mess with you. He doesn't just mess with the host. He goes ahead and informs on the Jewish people to the Roman emperor, knowing it could lead to the whole destruction of the temple. And it could lead to the death of millions of people and the destruction of the whole community. What's going on over here, Bar Kamsa? Everybody, all of us, have been hurt by somebody else. And maybe, unfortunately, we want to take revenge. We never think of bringing about destruction, national destruction. How do you even explain Bar Kamsa's ways? Bar Kamsa, we felt so sorry for him before, and he was dealt with in a harmful way, but now... So maybe Bar Kamsa was a lousy guy. Probably he was. Maybe he was a troublemaker. Maybe that's why the host didn't want him at the party. Maybe that's why the rabbis at the party were upset that he was there and very happy that he is no longer going to be there anymore. Maybe he was known to be a community troublemaker, a lousy guy. It's a little complicated. We don't know enough about Bar Kamsa. In any event, here, the fault of Zechariah, says Rashi, was Zechariah's excessive tolerance. He should have dealt with Bar Kamsa as he should have. Maybe even put him to death or imprisoned him or whatever. But you know, a leader is faced with this challenge all the time. Sometimes in your community comes a person who is not, contributing positively to the environment of the community. And It's a test because you need to first and foremost care about the majority of the community and for their welfare. If somebody's coming to disturb that, you need to deal with that person harshly. But on the other hand, feelings of empathy and feelings of compassion towards that person, you also don't want to reject that person and throw them out. And maybe you can help them and save them. It's a dilemma that leaders always have. But it seems that at some point in time, you cannot have so much tolerance that one person can ruin it for everyone else. And if one person is going to ruin it for everyone else, you need to put that person in their place. You need to deal with them harshly. And Zechariah did not do that. He had too much tolerance and patience for that person. And says Rabbi Yochanan, that was the fault of Zechariah. And that's a difficult balance that all communal leaders, rabbis, have to face and address. Second explanation. Here's a creative idea. Apparently, when Bar Kamsa with the Roman dignitaries came to offer this kaf, and there was a debate between the priest and Zechariah, yes, no, Zechariah said, this is too weighty of a matter for me to judge on my own. I want to bring this up to the Sanhedrin, to the great court. The great court of 71 judges, let them decide what we should do. And so he takes the animal and he walks it out of the sanctuary, out of the temple, to go to the court and present the case to the judges. But when he came out of the sanctuary, Bar Kamsa and the Roman dignitaries there saw that they're bringing the animal back out. The animal was supposed to be sacrificed. So they right away understood, or they interpreted, they're refusing the sacrifice. And so they ran quickly back to the emperor to tell him, the Jews are rebelling against you. Now Zechariah saw what happened, that they're running back to Rome, so he runs after them and he says, wait, hold on a moment. We haven't rejected the sacrifice. We're just dealing with the question right now. But it was too late. They already left. He couldn't catch up with them. And so they go back to the emperor, and in the end, we know what happened. What was Zechariah's mistake? His humility. Why did he say, I'm not in a position to judge this on my own? I have to go to the Sanhedrin. That wasn't true. You, Zechariah, were the head of the Sanhedrin. You were the head of you were the chief justice. You were the head of the priests. You had every power and every right to make this decision. Why didn't you? Why didn't Zechariah? Because Zechariah didn't believe in himself. He didn't understand his authority. He didn't understand his power. He was in a position, he had the knowledge, he had the know-how, he had the skill set, he had the background, he had the experience. This was his job. But he didn't recognize that. He doubted himself. He wasn't comfortable making this decision on his own. He said, I need the help of my colleagues. And Rabbi Yochanan of the Talmud says that was a mistake. If you have a position, you have to use it. Being humble and saying, I'm not sure if I can really do this, when you can do this and you've been empowered to do this and you're in a position to do this, is a big mistake. Which leads the third commentary is very similar and says what the decision had to be made over here was, as we said earlier, the Hora'at Sha'ah, a temporary suspending of regular law and an application of a temporary law where to sacrifice the blemished animal. You could do this. Jewish law says you can't do this because it's a temporary law and because it will maintain peace with the Roman authorities. And you, Zechariah, the head of the court, have every power in the world to do this. And why didn't you do it? Why didn't you why did you rule saying, no, let's not offer this thing because maybe people they have a false impression that you're allowed to offer blemished animals. This is not a time for those kinds of calculations. This is a time when the life of the Jewish people are on the line. This is a time when the state of sovereignty in Israel is on the line. The dignity of God, because the temple could be destroyed. At this time, you have to make that ruling. Zechariah, why didn't you make that ruling? And Zechariah says, I wasn't confident enough. I wasn't sure of myself. I wasn't sure that I was doing the right thing. It's humility, but says Rabbi Yochanan, it's excessive humility. You're not allowed to have such humility. If God puts you in a place where you can be influential and you have the power, rightfully so, to do it, and you shy away, you are guilty. You're not using the position, the power, the knowledge, the skill, the authority that's been given to you. And because of that, the temple was destroyed. Another explanation is, the Medrash says that Zechariah was actually one of the guests at the host's party. And remember, none of the great rabbis spoke up when Bar Kamsa is being publicly humiliated. So we suggested earlier, no one else spoke up because they were all in the consumed by the plague of this flattery. And they needed the host. Maybe they needed his money, his protection, his whatever it was. But so the fact that they all made this mistake, no, we know that was going on at the time. But Rabbi Yochanan says, but Zechariah, you made this mistake. You didn't speak up. Why didn't you speak up? You're not somebody who stoops so low into this false flattery of others. Doesn't matter the impression you're going to make to the host. You should have spoken up and protested what the host is doing. And Zechariah answered, or would have answered, I was too shy. I didn't have the courage, the strength to do it. Everybody's sitting around quietly watching what's happening. I should stand up. I should voice my opinion. I should make a protest. When no one else is speaking up, I didn't feel it's my place. You didn't feel it's your place. Zechariah, if it's not your place, whose place is it? You were the leading rabbi of the time. As a leading rabbi, you need to know your position. You need to know who you are and where you are at all times. And to step down and say, I'm too shy, I don't have the strength or the courage to speak up, to become very unpopular when you're speaking the truth, that's not an excuse for the chief rabbi. It is very hard to stand up and speak out when no one else is speaking out. It makes you uncomfortable. It may make you unpopular. It may sever ties with all kinds of people. It's very difficult. And if an average person chooses not to do it, we can understand. We can maybe even forgive. But when a leader chooses not to do it, you want to be a leader, you've got to stand up. You've got to say the right thing at the right time. There is no excuse not to. So Zechariah is faulted. Only Zechariah is faulted for not standing up and protesting the host. And that's why eventually the temple was destroyed. Fifth explanation. These are two very beautiful explanations coming up. Whenever the Sanhedrin, the great court, would adjudicate a capital offense case, a case of dinei nefashot, capital punishment, the way it worked was that the 71 judges, yes, Gary, thank you for sharing that. And when we do Holocaust studies and other kinds of studies, the upstanders versus the bystanders. And we know that there's a lot of things bystanders did that unfortunately, or didn't do, and unfortunately what it led to. And it's very hard to judge. It is. We don't know the difficulties, the complexities of what was going on, but we do always want to educate our children, our generations, to be upstanders and to always speak up, but especially the leadership. And this is something we need to be very cognizant of today. Today, when there's injustice going on to anybody, to any person, to any race, to any community, everyone needs to stand up. It's a test of the time. Okay, sometimes you got to stand up and expose the emperor's clothing, his nakedness. Say the truth. Truth's not always popular, but you got to say it. Thank you, Gary. Okay, so now back to the fifth answer. Fifth, and then a sixth, and then we're done. So the Sanhedrin, 71 judges sat in like a semicircle. And the way that the seats were lined up, the head and the most prominent sat in the middle, and next to prominence was sat next to him, etc., etc. And then the lowest, newcomers would sit at the edge. And when the case was discussed, we asked the newcomers, sort of the rookies, the lower level judges, we asked them first what their opinion is, and then we went around the whole room, eventually landing up with the head judge. And the reason for that was because we want to get a majority opinion. Now, if the head judge would voice his opinion right away, well, everyone else would be too embarrassed to argue with him. Okay, if he says the following, even though I disagree, but who am I? He's the head judge. I just came on the court this year. I'm too embarrassed. So we want to get the genuine opinion of all the judges so we can have a majority, figure out what the majority is. So we have the newcomers voice their opinion first, and then we go in order of degree until we land up with the head judge. Zechariah ben Avkilus, he was the head judge, but he was humble. He didn't feel that way. He didn't feel like he's the head, he's the boss. He didn't feel he's the greatest person. He wasn't aware, perhaps genuinely so, wasn't aware that once he voices an opinion, no one dares argue with him. He just thought, I'm another of the opinions. I'll say my opinion, but you can argue. And so he said his opinion. He said, we're not going to offer this calf as a sacrifice. We're not going to kill Bar Kamsa. But once he said his opinion, everyone was too embarrassed to argue with him. No one's going to disagree with Zechariah. He wasn't supposed to voice his opinion right away. He was supposed to wait for everyone else to voice their opinion, and then he'll say his, and then we'll decide what the majority is. But Zechariah was humble. But that's an unhealthy humility, because even though you're humble, you have to know your place. Moses is the most humble in the whole Torah. But Moses knew who he was. He knew he's the only guy who spoke to God mouth to mouth. He's the guy that God appointed to receive the Torah. He knew he's the leader. He knew his place. Zechariah should have known his place. He should not have spoken up right away and not giving a voice to any other of the priests or the judges. And because he did that, it was a mistake. Nobody dared argue with him, and that led to the destruction of the temple. One final answer. The issue came up. Should we offer the sacrifice or not? Zechariah knew about the concept of Hora'at Sha'ah. He knew that you can temporarily suspend the law in case of great emergency, in case of protecting the Jewish people and keeping and maintaining peaceful relations with the Roman Emperor. He knew that. Of course he did. However, Zechariah wasn't just a clever man, he was also a holy man. He had Ruach HaKodesh. He had prophetic powers. And he had been told as a prophecy by God that the temple is going to be destroyed. That was already decreed by God. So Zechariah said to himself, I know I could apply the ruling and offer this calf, this blemished calf as a sacrifice, but at what point? I'm not going to save anything anyhow. The temple is destined to be destroyed. If I could save something, I would apply this law, but there's no point over here. So we may as well keep the law, not break the law, if the temple is anyhow going to be destroyed. But he was very humble. So when he told the ruling to the other priests, and he said, we're not going to offer this calf, he didn't explain his rationale, his reason for it. He didn't want to tell them, I'm a Navi, I have prophecy, I had Ruach HaKodesh, I know God's already decreed the temple is going to be destroyed. He didn't want to speak about those virtues publicly to others and let them know about his holy prophecies and his divine spirit. He was too humble for that. He wanted to present himself as a regular guy like everyone else, another one of the judges. So he said his ruling, but he didn't give the explanation, the reason for his ruling. And that was a big mistake. Because if he would have been proud of who he was, honest with who he was, and told them, by the way, I've been told by the Ruach HaKodesh spirit of prophecy that the temple is going to be destroyed, and that's why I'm making the rule not to offer the blemished calf. If all the priests and all the Jewish people would have heard about that prophecy and known that it's going to happen soon, it would have created a national arousal, a national movement for teshuvah. People would have come together and said, let's do something to change God's mind. And we have a principle: whenever God makes a harsh decree against the Jewish people, the decree can always be averted through teshuvah, through prayer, through extra mitzvot, extra Torah study, through improving your character and improving your ways. You can always change God's mind. And because he didn't let them know about the reason of his ruling, he didn't give them a chance to make this national movement of teshuvah and possibly change God's mind and maybe stop the temple from being destroyed. And because of his humility and his ruling, therefore, that led to the temple being destroyed. In conclusion, who are we to judge Zechariah ben Avkulas, the great rabbi, the head of the court, someone with Ruach HaKodesh? We're not here to judge him. In general, it's very hard to judge any leader unless you've been sitting in their seat, in their shoes, because if you haven't, there's a lot you don't know. We only know what the Talmud tells us. Rabbi Yochanan says that it's Zechariah ben Avkulas' fault. So at least we can learn lessons from here. So often, Hashem, God puts you in a place at a particular time. And you may have the knowledge, the know-how, the skill set, the experience, the background, the training. And you can be effective. You can be influential. You can speak up, say something, and do something. And rightfully so you should, because if God has put you there at the right time, he's giving you a message to do what you have to do. And yet we shy away. Or yet we doubt ourselves. Or now all of a sudden our humility kicks in. And we say, who am I? Not me. There's other greater people around here. This is a job for somebody else. The lesson we need to learn is that we have to take things into our hand when God presents them our way. If we are positioned to do something good, do something positive, save someone's life, protect someone's dignity, call out an injustice, speak up and for the truth and for what's right, even if it's hard and difficult, even if it's going to ruin our popularity, it must be done. That is the lesson we must take, because if we don't do what we are positioned to do, it can sadly lead to a lot of destruction to one person or to many, many others. The Talmud says that in the era leading up to the coming of Mashiach, Pnei Hador ke Pnei HaKelev, which literally means the face of the generation will be like the face of a dog. What does that mean? Gary, 1 second. Good question. The face of the generation is like the face of a dog. So the simple meaning is that the times of before Mashiach comes, the whole generation is not going to look very good. Humans are going to look like dogs. Nothing wrong with dogs if dogs behave like dogs, but if humans behave like dogs, something is very wrong. So human behavior, the human spirit will become very primitive, will become corrupt, and all kinds of animalistic traits and animalistic impulses will pervade among the human community. And things are going to be so bad that Hashem's going to say, we have to bring Mashiach, because if we wait any longer, the humans are going to turn into animals. That's a simple explanation. And maybe we're seeing that playing out in some places nowadays. But here's another beautiful explanation relevant to today's topic. Pnei Hador ke Pnei HaKelev. The face of a generation is like the face of a dog. Who's the face of a generation? The leaders are the face of a generation. And the leaders are going to behave like the face of a dog. The face of a dog is the dog's owner. What happens when a dog's owner? Well, the face of a dog, I'm sorry. The leaders will be like the face of a dog. What's a dog? A dog may run ahead of the owner when they're going on a walk. But whenever they're running ahead, looking like the leader, they're always turning around to see where the owner is, where the master is. Maybe he wants to go that way or another way. And even if the dog's walking ahead, he always wants to follow the cues of the owner behind him, which way to go. And the Talmud says, when leaders behave that way, they've got a problem. When leaders turn around to the people and ask the people what should be done, they take cue from the people instead of them leading and guiding the people, you have a big problem. Of course, leaders need the vote, the confidence of their people. That's true. And you have to build that confidence and that trust. But when you have built that and achieved that and you are appointed leader, you lead. You tell the people what's right and what's wrong. You tell them which direction to go. You know, you're the leader because of your wisdom, because of your experience, because of your skills. The moment you turn around and you say, whatever you people tell me to do, we'll do. And you're doing that maybe because you need them, you need their money, you need their support or whatever it is. That's corrupt. That's not a leader anymore. That's like the dog who turns around to the master. Leadership is so important. It's so difficult. A generation that's blessed with good leaders is a blessed generation. And in our time, we need to look around and choose our leaders wisely. Leaders who we can have trust and confidence in. Leaders who have trust and confidence in us. But they are prepared to lead. And they're prepared to make the big, bold decisions to differentiate right from wrong and to stand up and protect those values and protect the law in ways that even if we disagree with, but they know better than us, and they're doing their job. And leaders should not have these false humility. All of us can be a leader in some way in our lives. And not to have the false humility, to have the confidence. Gary's asking, how do we build up our confidence? That's a great question. Learning this story itself, I think, has already achieved something of that. Figure out the kind of damage and harm you can do when you don't have that confidence. But yes, many people today are suffering from a lack of confidence in themselves. They have the skills, they have the knowledge, they have the training, they've been put in a certain position, they've been empowered to do something, and they're still not ready to do it. It's a big challenge. We have to recognize that Hashem controls the world. And the more that we tap into the word of God and the word of Torah, things will be right. Even if things are difficult and decisions are difficult to make, But if you're making them with the right spirit and the right intentions, somehow it'll end up being right. But if you choose to shy away from doing the right thing, it'll always end in some kind of destruction and harm. We have to talk more about this. We are a generation that needs a lot more confidence, a lot more self-esteem, a lot more pride in ourselves. And when we'll have that, we'll be healthier, and we'll be more effective and more influential and create more goodness around us and around our world. So we need to address this more. Gary, thank you for that question. We'll do this more in coming weeks. Friends, I want to wish you a beautiful day. Thank you for joining us, and God bless you.